Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar entitled, Do You Have a Business Case for Outsourcing Payroll? My name is Peter Banks, and I'm the founder and MD of the HR Director, a strategic HR resource for senior HR leaders in print, person, and online. We are delighted to partner today with SD Worx, who are a HR and payroll solutions specialist. And this webinar, we're going to discuss and consider the business case for outsourcing payroll. So our speakers today are Bob Rehill. So Bob is the founder and CEO of Bob Rehill Associates. Doug Brown. Doug is the Director of HR at AG Barr. Wendy Doherty, who is the People Director at Bestway Retail. And Mandy Hawley, who is the Enterprise Sales Director for SD Worx. I'm running everything in the background for us, which we're going to need is with the polls, etc. We have Natalie McDonald, who is the Senior Events Manager at SD Worx as well. So welcome all and thanks for joining us. Okay, so just some brief housekeeping, if I may. So we've got an hour slot, so we're pretty tight on time, and that includes a Q&A at the end for about 10 minutes. We want to make this very interactive for you. So you know, we don't want it to be just a presentation. This is about a discussion, and we really want to hear from you and help you as much as we can. So if you have got any questions during the session, please send them in, and we will basically do our best to get through them. Anything else we can deal with in the Q&A at the end. But let's make it interactive so you get as much out of this as you can. Also, we are recording the whole webinar, so this will obviously be available for you to download and share with colleagues, etc. And there will be some useful links and some research and useful articles at the end as well to help you. We'll share as well. We've got some polls today. We've got a couple of polls which we'd like you to take part in. They'll pop up and you can have a go at those. And we've got not one but two Christmas polls. So we've got a Christmas prize draw for an M&S hamper, or two of them. So have a go at those, and we'll announce the winners during the webinar as well. So okay, so let's take a look at the agenda. So the agenda, really, we're going to cover these kind of areas. So current market trends to set out the sort of overview, SaaS versus outsourced payroll. We'll then have a look at AG Barr and Bestway Retail in terms of their sort of business case, in terms of how they've come about this. And then we'll have a little kind of roundup at the end with some key takeaways and time for the Q&A. Okay. So let's actually look at the first slide, which is really about market trends. So, I mean, I was struck by the staggering number there, 343.19 billion by the end of 2025. So, good morning all our speakers. So, but what we're looking at here is really, you know, I guess this is all about change, isn't it? So, Mandy, if I can start with you, have you seen the reasons that companies are looking to outsource change in recent years, and kind of if so, why?
And definitely we've seen change. I think sort of whilst you mentioned a huge figure on the screen there, which is a global figure, I think it's worth noting that 26% of the global market share is actually European. And within that European market, the UK, Germany and France sort of top the polls in terms of a propensity to outsource. I think sort of what we did see around sort of 10 years ago was outsourcing was really focused around administrative outsourcing. So looking at sort of what administrative tasks could be outsourced, and actually can an outsourcing contract be more cost efficient than doing those things in-house. But over recent years, and with the event of cloud technology, we've seen the conversations change quite a bit with clients, and looking more around how an outsourced relationship can support the business strategy, provide the HR department with flexibility that they require to remain competitive. And quite often that flexibility is something that an HR department either can't afford or actually doesn't want to afford in their own business, because they have their own core business to focus on. I mean, looking at the list there, I think they fall into four main areas, which again resonates with what we see as to be the reasons that people want to speak to us now. I think they're technology, skill set, employee experience, and then the big one of data and security. I'd say the one thing that hasn't changed, however, is that payroll affects employee morale. and does reflect business financial stability. So overlooking it or getting it wrong is not an option now, as it wasn't at any point during that period.
Okay, great. So changes, obviously we're going through huge change at the moment, you know, in unprecedented times, this word we keep hearing. So Bob, just could you give us a little overview of what you're seeing, I guess, in terms of your, you know, your role, in terms of, I think there's a middle part really, don't you, in terms of client and outsourcing?
Yeah, thanks for that, Peter, and thanks for welcoming me onto the session. I mean, you're right, we play a role helping organizations globally with thinking through what they want to do from you know, outsourcing through to managed services or in-house. And I think what we're seeing recently is the need to outsource is driven predominantly by skills, actually. And just think about what we've been going through in the COVID era, the amount of changes that are driven to the payroll functions over the last 8 or 9 months, with you know the different variations of pay that can be done, you know, and all of those legislation changes coming in, and the ability then for organizations to have a payroll function that can respond quickly and deal with those sorts of aspects is critical, right? And so a lot of organizations, especially global ones, where compliance with local countries and payroll reporting and general compliance is key to make sure that you continue to pay people. As Mandy say, you know, your people payment is probably the #1 most important aspect to your business, is critically important. So rather than continue to build in-house skills and want to have the skills across your whole team, outsourcing allows you to bring in and have on tap the skills that are needed for that. So a lot of movement we're seeing, Peter, is around the fact that actually, do we want to focus on what we do well as a business and let someone else really who understands payroll and can meet the compliance globally do the stuff that they need to do as well?
So this complexity and the increase in compliance is kind of becoming a bit. I mean, do you find, I guess, if I bring you, Doug, in, do you find, has that been a real, do you think, over a headache really? Do you see that as being really complex?
I reckon, well, morning everybody, and thanks for introducing me, Peter. I recognise what Bob was saying there. We would encapsulate that more under the banner of risk and managing risk. And the risks that we see are that skill set risk. I mean, we're a medium-sized business for about 1,000 employees. And when we had insourced our payroll, there was 3 people, but we were forever seeing turnover in a very small team. And that is a huge issue for you when you're managing a payroll from a risk perspective. And then the other risks we see are just technology speeding up and the need for it, and this expectation of what you see in your consumer life versus what you see in your work life. And there was a huge disconnect with what people were getting from AG Barr at work versus what they would get if they went to the local Apple store. So we needed to sort of fuse those 2 things together, and I don't see that trend changing, to be honest. But primarily for us, it was about risk.
Wendy, I saw you nodding your head there. So again, that obviously chimes with you.
Yeah, risk, really around risk and governance. And also, you know, exactly as Doug said, particularly where you've got small in-house functions, just having an always-on payroll that you've got access to is another key driver to mitigate all of that risk and ensure you can give, you know, the right assurance to colleagues that they'll be paid and paid correctly.
I guess you know, a lot depending on the size of the organisation, there's legacy systems, there's all this complexity, you know, in the background, which is not probably up to task.
Exactly.
Andy, just on what Doug and Wendy have shared, any thoughts on, is that sort of things you're seeing?
I mean, sort of especially the technology, the consumer technology versus the internal technology has been a massive change, I think, sort of in terms of the way that we speak to clients at the moment. You see, even some of the largest organisations in the UK and in the world, people go to them for a role expecting to get the same experience that they do when they go into their store or buy their product. And actually, some of the legacy systems that they're using sort of in those could actually be so as archaic as spreadsheets and bits of paper, and sort of then that employee brand versus the consumer brand is really compromised.
Yeah.
Anything to add from anyone? Bob, did you want to finish up on that one, or?
No, yeah, it's a good point Mandy makes. I mean, I think the whole movement from a technology perspective to, as Doug said, you know, bringing our our social life into our work life, and the behaviors that we have and the way we interact with technology, notification, apps, etc., are critical. And I think all of that is also leading us to sort of think about organizations that are being innovative, you know, thinking ahead and coming with those solutions, which makes the reason for outsourcing even more compelling when those organizations have that product there that fits that need.
And there's a real theme of, I think this has been happening over a few years now, this shifting, as you said, Mandy, shifting to a customer-centric process. This kind of, you know, there's this idea of kind of looking after your employees as we market to our customers, isn't there? So I can see, you know, how we can be much more advanced with that. Okay, let's move on to our second slide, really. Now this one really, I think we kind of erred a little bit on some of this. In fact, actually, I'm going to go back one slide. Actually, think about this. I'm going to go back one. Excuse me there. So just we touched on technology there, which is a huge enabler. So let's look at this one. And Mandy, again, if I could start with you, I guess, do you think these advances in technology, which we touched on, is that kind of changed the business case for outsourcing payroll?
I think it's changed the business case in HR and payroll fundamentally, and outsourcing is part of that. I'm previously, I mean, even sort of 10 years ago, working in HR and payroll, looking at buying and procuring and a business case for HR and payroll predominantly really only affected the HR and payroll teams. Whereas now, I read a stat this morning that there's 50 billion smart devices collecting and analysing and sharing data. And with anything like sort of mobile first technology, an employee of any age, not even just Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, an employee of any age now expects to be able to submit a holiday request on their phone, get their payslip on their phone, do all of those things. So actually looking at outsourcing your payroll and selecting a supplier actually affects every individual employee now, not just the HR and payroll team. So I think there's been a massive shift in technology. Technology has also replaced a lot of what previously the business case for outsourcing was based on. So if you were looking at that administration, outsourcing that administration with AI, with integration, with better platforms, we've removed a lot of that administration. So the business case for outsourcing is now a lot more sophisticated than it was before.
And Bob, obviously cloud computing, I guess, you know, this quite a big change in terms of how we're working nowadays.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, you know, I echo what Mandy's saying as well. I think, you know, the ability to move to these cloud technologies is a lot easier than it was before. If you think about, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we used to think about outsourcing as being probably more about labor arbitrage, right? Still having teams of people, but actually let's put them in a cheaper location and still carry on doing some transactional stuff, but do it in a cheaper way. But outsourcing now is a bit more about, well, how do we leverage technology and how do we leverage these organizations that have really taken, you know, the fore of the cloud tech and brought that to our fingertips. So, you know, the idea of outsourcing is more about how do we leverage tech rather than labor arbitrage, which was the messages 10, 15 years ago. So really, really exciting place. The other exciting place is there are many organizations that are now doing this, and as technology becomes more advanced, the cost of maintaining it, the cost of developing software comes down, and therefore the cost potentially of outsourcing to those organizations, you're going to reap the benefit of that as well as they get economies of scale. So really good place to be, and excited that the cloud market is really picking up, and I do see that as the way forward in cloud tech.
Okay, good. All right, let's actually now move on to this next slide, which I teased you with earlier. So yeah, this one here is we're looking at, you know, uncertainty. Goodness me, if there was ever a time for uncertainty, it's now, isn't it? So this is an interesting one. I'm quite keen, you know, just looking at what we're looking at there. And I know you mentioned UK versus European earlier on, Mandy, actually. So I thought this stat on the side was quite interesting, wasn't it? In terms of this, you know, 13.6 companies in the UK mostly or fully outsource their payroll to a third party, which is incredibly low. So let's start, Mandy, if I could, with you, if I may. So this obviously was based on, I think, is it 3,000? Yeah, 3,000 companies in 11 different countries. This data. So I guess, any surprises here, you know, in those top three? I'm probably shaking our heads going, well, no, not really. Any surprises in terms of what we're seeing there, you know, bear in mind the times we're in?
I was going to say, given the times we're in, I don't think it's any surprise that sort of payrolls come out on top. I mean, if you look across the recent pandemic, I mean, there wasn't any doubt that payroll professionals were classed as key workers, along with a number of other key workers during that time. Paying people has to be number one during a crisis. However, and I sort of, having worked with Wendy and known sort of some of the stresses that she's gone through during the pandemic, whilst payroll has to be a priority to organisations who are sort of retailers or manufacturers or financial institutions, do they want payroll to be their number one priority? Or actually sort of number one to them is focusing on demand fluctuation and looking after employees, and actually having someone whose core business and priority it is to look after payroll. So I think there's been a massive upheaval recently, and in the midst of that, I think payroll has raised its profile. Overnight, companies had to get their payroll teams working from home, get their payroll teams online 24/7, be able to respond to legislation overnight. I think there's something like 9.6 million people furloughed. That is a massive impact on, as you say, Doug, 3 people in one payroll team who actually, and negotiating employment law is not their skill set necessarily. So it's certainly not a surprise, I don't think, to us that payrolls come out on top, especially in the times that we're in.
Bob, what are your thoughts on what we're looking on screen there again?
Yeah, I echo what Mandy's saying. I mean, I think, you know, it's great that payroll have got the visibility this year. I know for the wrong reasons, but you know, there have been, as far as I'm concerned, for many years been the sort of number one business critical process in most organizations, right? Paying people on time, making sure they get paid on time is absolutely critical. They don't get, I suppose, the awareness that maybe they should do as payroll professionals and payroll teams and suppliers. So, you know, if we don't pay our people, organizations don't. Quite interested that well-being's quite a little bit lower than I expected. I think, especially in the current year, I think well-being, both mental but also financial well-being, has been a massive item on the agenda this year as well, and payroll has a part to play in that as well, right? So, you know, making sure that people are being paid on time. So the furlough schemes, making sure people get paid. You know, well-being for me includes mental and financial well-being. So would have liked to have seen that a bit higher, but yeah, absolutely concur with what Mandy's saying there.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. That whole point of being that security and being paid on time in these very difficult times has been, and I agree with you. I expect to see a little bit higher than that. I know, Wendy, you were shaking your head then, and you know, so you've obviously gone through some pain, and probably Doug, I'll come to you in a moment. But so yeah, I can only imagine going through furlough with large numbers of employees and having to manage that whole process must have been a challenge.
Yeah, I think what Mandy was referencing was more about the fact that we decided to start a payroll outsource project whilst in the middle of a pandemic, which probably wasn't the most ideal time to make the decision, but we've ploughed on, haven't we, anyway? And we're, you know, working through that successfully despite the challenges. Obviously, you know, a constantly moving feast with the data that you're trying to capture, with the payrolls that you're trying to move, etc. So, you know, now more than ever is a reason to, you know, consider what you do with your payroll, because actually all of that change that's going on around you makes it even more important to control those risks, to get the right governance and assurance in place, as Doug and I were talking about before, and to have a always on, as I would say, payroll facility at your fingertips. I mean, we're still going through the process and we haven't got to the end of a full outsource yet. But, you know, certainly at the same time, as Mandy said, you know, trying to manage people's pay is one thing, but trying to ensure that you meet consumer demand, that, you know, in the likes that Mandy just talked about, you know, be it in financial services, retail services, manufacturing services, you know, key workers at the end of the day trying to feed or support the country, whilst at the same time trying to ensure that your colleagues are paid correctly so that they can represent you well while serving the customer, becomes more and more critical. And the balance of those tasks, you know, do I focus on the customer, do I focus on the people, do I focus on the pay element of people, or is it the welfare? All of those things there that you've got on the page, I guess we're fluctuating up and down from an importance at any one moment through any one day, particularly at the beginning of when we started this with Mandy earlier in the summer. Yeah.
Yeah. Not okay. Yeah. Agreed. Not the best timing. I'll give you that one. Okay. So
When's going to be good? Yeah.
And what do you think? I guess so. Really, what we're seeing is, there is a change in people's view on payroll. Through the pandemic. I think that's what's coming out of this. Is Mandy, would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, there has been a massive change, and I think there's been a massive change in just bringing sort of some of payroll departments, as you say, are quite often unsung heroes. We always used to say nobody ever hears about a payroll if it's right. You only ever hear about a payroll if it's wrong. You never thank your payroll team for getting your pay right every month. You only ever call them if something's not right. And I think sort of some of that has come out in the pandemic. We've seen a couple of clients come to speak to us whose payroll was working, but it was ticking over. It was hung together by a few threads. It was on some legacy technology. It potentially wasn't cloud. So overnight, when you've got to get everybody working from home, that just wasn't possible. And it comes back to that flexibility piece as well. And not that we hope there'll not be another pandemic, but of course there will be something else next week or next month that requires flexibility within the payroll team. And I think that's the thing that's very difficult to get with an in-house team and an in-house piece of technology where there are a very small skill set managing that.
Yeah. Doug, then just on that note, so do you feel there was absolutely a much more of a challenge on in-house payroll team versus than recent years? Do you think, I guess because of that compliance and complexity?
Yeah, I mean, it touches on why we ultimately took the decision to outsource our payroll. And I would echo the panel's points that, COVID has magnified and maybe accelerated many trends that are already kind of there. I'm not sure how we would have coped if we hadn't actually outsourced and had our software in the cloud, because it made remote working, it made how people could access the information much easier. So all my employees can access their payroll through their mobile phone, and it's dead easy. And they've been doing it for a couple of years now. So it's kind of norm to them now, but they kind of probably have forgotten that prior to that it was a little bit different. There was still some getting printed and things like that. It was that. So I would say that COVID's been an accelerant. I would definitely say, just on the slide that's on the screen here, I'm very much like Wendy. This is a static picture. It's like at a moment in time. I would say that over the last 10 months, where those little yellow dots are would vary depending on which employee group I was talking about and at what point in time exactly in the pandemic, maybe related to which tier they happen to find themselves in, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But I recognise that, and I would echo the point that Bob's made, that certainly in our business, employee well-being has been much more at the front of the dialogue, both expected by employee but also expected by manager and senior leader, and spent a lot more time talking about that. I'm not here to advocate that we are sort of at the head of the curve or anything on these things, but it's certainly, again, COVID has accelerated trends that were there for us and just moved it, kind of take a step forward. So it becomes very much part of what we offer.
Move on to our next slide. So we're going to do a quick poll here. So what if you could have a go at this one for us all, and we can get some live interest, live feedback here. So what is the biggest challenge you are currently facing? So is it A, keeping up to date and compliant with changing payroll legislation, B, effective workforce management, or C, outdated payroll and HR technology, D, lack of integration with our payroll and HR tools, or E, HR service to employees? So if you can kind of have a go at that one, and we'll share those sort of screens back as we go, really. We'll see what we get back from that. Okay.
Thanks, Peter. Should we keep the poll open a little while longer? I can see nearly half of our audience have voted, so I'll just leave it a little bit longer to collect the responses.
No problem. So yeah, what we're looking for, let's see what we can get, and it'd be interesting to see where we are, where everyone's kind of looking at this from, because I think there's some big challenges out there, and then those kind of what those drivers are kind of move you to different directions, I think.
I'll bring the results on screen now, Peter, for you to discuss. Sure.
Right, let's move on then, and let's wait for see what we get through. So let's move on to this next slide, which is I guess.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Sorry, the results are on screen now. Apologies. I'm happy to read them out for you if you like. We have 8% have voted keeping up to date and compliant with legislation. 23% have voted that effective workforce management is their biggest challenge. 46% outdated payroll and HR technology. 15% lack of integration with payroll and HR, and for 8% HR service to their employees.
Okay, so Mandy, thoughts on what we're seeing on the poll then?
Yeah, I'm sort of certainly not a surprise given the conversation we've just been having, that given recent events, outdated payroll and HR technology, I think sort of it's just magnified that issue. So if there were issues before that people were papering over the cracks, people being at home, not in the office, you could previously just nip across their office floor and fix that issue. All of those things have just been magnified. I mean, lack of integration came up there in terms of HR and payroll tools, and I think those two are interlinked. Sort of, Bob, I know that's something that you massively look at with your clients, and lack of integration also goes into the business case because it causes huge inefficiencies in any process, and then the inefficiencies then cause inaccuracies of data. So certainly not surprised on the top vote.
Bob, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised, and I think, you know, we're seeing as an organisation, because we help, as we say, organisations globally with this, you know, the top 2 or 3 things we're doing at the moment is actually helping some organisations thinking about their payroll and HR technology, because, you know, this the last sort of 9-10 months have opened up some of their eyes, and they recognise that they need to be prepared for the future. So not surprised with that result, and not surprised with the HR, because HR and payroll so interlinked, you know, with data, the need to drive information. So yeah, I'm glad we got those results actually, because if everyone said they were compliant and happy, we wouldn't be conversation, would we?
I think interesting that effective workforce management came up as a second one for me, because I think sort of that's the third sort of point in the technology triangle if you have variable paid employees. So in terms of collecting that variable paid data, if you have a disparate workforce, either sort of from a manufacturing point of view, a retail, shop floor, mobile employees, so actually sort of getting that time data into HR and payroll, I think it's interesting the link that is starting to come through between effective workforce management and then payroll and HR technology.
All right, great. Well, let's move on. So let's get on to this slide, which I was trying to look at just a moment ago. So this is more about decision-making processes. So which elements were instrumental in deciding to outsource payroll and administration? So again, probably not too many surprises on the the top one there, because obviously, yeah, admin burden is obviously a huge issue, and I think what we're going to look at here a little bit, which is this technology and this automation and this AI, and kind of what that can actually achieve here for us. So so I guess looking at again at all of these, so Doug, could I start with you, just looking at that bar chart? What are you looking? You concur with that? Make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been reading the graph there that's on the screen. I'm not surprised at all that the top one has come out as to reduce the administrative burden, and this will be a point that maybe we tease out later on, but about how strategic is having your payroll insourced versus inside your business versus outside your business. But there's no doubt in my experience that's the number one thing that you would look at. In terms of surprises, I'm a little bit surprised about things like, to ensure confidentiality of data, but given the world that we live in these days in terms of GDPR. But aside from that, these things look like a sensible set of results, to be honest.
Yeah. Mandy, what do you take from this?
Yeah, apart from the fact that personally I find it quite annoying that the graph doesn't go down in the order of which the answers are. I think that would be easier to interpret the answers. However, as it's our slide, then it's sort of a complaint on our behalf. And I think sort of it's an interesting between the top two answers. So the top two answers are administrative burden and then increasing the quality of HR services to workforce. And I think sort of that plays to that. Is it a tactical or strategic decision? And it's very difficult to call out whether it is tactical or strategic, because one might actually trigger the decision to look at outsourcing, but I think it's very difficult to separate the two. And I think sort of that shows it in all of them, really, that there is this continuing pressure between tactical and strategic, and in terms of building sort of that business case. Doug, you mentioned the point about data. From an outsourced point of view, it's been one of the biggest changes in the last couple of years about how people, I would say more how people contract and procure and select a provider rather than make their own internal decision to outsource.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, certainly in our tender process, it was high in our list of priorities.
Yeah, and sort of, I've never been as friendly with our IT security teams as I have been in the last couple of years. And for some, I mean, one bank that we recently spoke to said, the guy who we were working with, he said if he'd have been on the receiving end of the IT security questionnaires that they'd given us, then sort of he would have bowed out long ago, because they are sort of in some instances sort of quite significant. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we all sort of sway between strategic and tactical.
Yeah. And just Wendy, just quickly for you then. Obviously, I know this is early days for you. So what I guess out of those there, which scream at you to say, yeah, these were the ones that we really wanted to go for?
I mean, I guess for us, it was a number of those things. We've already talked about risk management. Actually, it was around also technology, and also from a control perspective. So I'm just looking here around financial stability and cost reduction being 15%. I actually feel like that might be higher for some, particularly in sectors like the sector that I represent, where you've got retail workers hourly paid based on consumer demand. You know, your hours will be very variable and fluctuate, and actually to be able to control and know those costs up front, and focus in on that cost where people is, you know, generally one of your highest overheads, was a real driver for us. As well as, of course, being able to make the processes as lean as possible, having ever-ready data at your fingertips that you can manipulate, being assured by the processes, and from a regulatory legal perspective that, you know, things were compliant and you could rely on this service. So I think the admin burden, I can see why that might be instrumental for some, and I guess that comes back to effectiveness of people and cost. But cost to me, I guess I'm surprised it's not slightly higher, either cost control or reducing a cost burden, one or the other, because ultimately in a business case, you know, cost does feature as much as removing task is cost, isn't it? So anyway, that's just my slant on it.
That's great. And Bob, do you want to sum up on that one?
Yeah, no, look, everyone said, you know, every organisation is different, so their priorities are going to be different. I think the one thing that sort of stands out for me here is I think the third and fourth items, enabling employees to focus on more strategic activities, but also increasing the HR services work, is an outcome that is driven by the top one, right? It's driven by the reduction of administrative burden. So almost, you know, the strategic aspect is I want to become better and more strategic, and I want better services, and in order for me to do that, I need to go and reduce the admin burden. So they're all interlinked and they all have relevance. So that's one thing that stands out for me.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And we talked just loosely there about, so, you know, is it a strategic decision or is it a tactical decision? So I don't know, Doug, if you can answer that. I mean, when you made your call, could you tell us which way you...
I think it depends on your lens, you know.
Yeah.
So if I put my company hat on and I say, is payroll strategic to AG Barr? Then the answer is no, it's not, because we're a consumer goods business and the strategic decisions are around how we manage our brands. If I drill down into sort of HR, is it a strategic decision about, do I want to manage that part of the service in or out? Then it becomes more meaningful as a discussion item. So the lens you apply is important. If I take the lens at HR, it very much lends it to the previous conversation for me, which was I wanted to find, I wanted to make sure that I could redeploy resource internally to other tasks. I wanted to upgrade my technology because I knew it wasn't fit for purpose going forward, and I thought there was a significant risk about just the legislative changes that were coming down the track and will continue to come down the track with payroll, and therefore it was kind of like the stars aligned. This is absolutely going to help me, and hence we put the business case together. So that would be my sort of thinking on those points about whether it's strategic. If you're focusing on HR, potentially for businesses, but not at a global level for me.
All right, and let's kind of take on slightly again then. So there's this thing about hidden costs, and I quite like to explore. So I guess you've got in-house payroll. I guess there are hidden costs. As an HR practitioner, you're aware of those kind of hidden costs, I guess, and what kind of are they? I mean, Wendy, do you have a call on that? Were you able to see the sort of hidden costs within what you were doing with your own internal payroll?
I guess more and more as you start to work through an outsource, you see what those hidden costs are. Nodding, so you perhaps have a finger on what they could be, as opposed to then starting to understand what they really are when you deep dive into some of that. But ultimately, there's hidden costs with everything, isn't there? Be it time and labour, because of archaic technology, ways of working, processes, errors that can happen because you've got multiple touch points, or it could be for someone else where you've got different systems that don't interface and data's dropping in different places. So I think you can start to very quickly get your business case to a point where you're in a much better space to have all those elements controlled than obviously trying to control some of those elements yourself. I think technology definitely, and integrated systems and processes and data, being able to interrogate your data will enable you to manage better some of those hidden costs. Because actually, if nothing else, it enables you to self-reflect back and say our ways of working need to change, because to move forward, actually, you've got to look at what's going wrong, whether you thought it was going wrong, but to make that process work with a new partner. So yeah. I think there's probably
sorry, Wendy. Yeah, okay. And Mandy, just very briefly on that then. So just can you give us a quick précis of hidden costs as you see it from your side?
Yeah, I mean, payroll departments are very good at getting payroll right and accurate, and getting employees paid. There's not many instances where I speak to somebody about outsourcing that the reason for outsourcing is because the pay is wrong. But I think sort of what it actually is looking at is what did it actually take to get that payroll correct. And it could be people working 24 hours a day before payroll. It could be an hour of a sort of every HR manager's time. It can be people on a retail shop floor doing a bit here and there. It can actually be the cost of an inefficiency, all of those hidden costs. I mean, and as Wendy, you say, any efficiency gain comes back to cost in the end anyway. Do you want somebody who should be serving a customer messing about trying to work out what hours they've been paid, etc., etc.? Do I say as an outsourced provider we can add to your bottom line and increase profitability? Probably a step too far. However, what outsourcing the payroll can do is give you those efficiencies back to do with as you wish within your own business.
I mean, Peter,
very finally on this point. Sorry, Doug.
Just on the hidden cost, the biggest learning I had between an insourced and an outsourced payroll was process discipline. So the bit that Wendy says about people working mega hours to make sure that absolutely what the employee sees is an accurate payslip. The move to outsourcing you drives that change in behaviours. So when you say you've got a payroll cutoff in an outsourced world, you do have a cutoff, whereas in insource you said you had a cutoff, but then there would be a second cutoff, and then
definitely totally agree.
Manipulate and manage, and the work burden that puts on in-house is significant. And until you.
Well, and even the fact of you understand your cost, don't you, with the managed payroll? So, you know, missing that cut-off, there's a cost to doing that, people understanding it, versus before, you know, Joan round the corner will just make sure she slips that through. There was still a cost to Joan doing that, but we didn't understand or articulate that. So, totally agree.
All right, just a very quick one on this then, just a yes or no answer then for you all. Do you feel that certain sectors are more likely to outsource or not, or does it not matter? Andy?
I would say it's more down to traits of organisations rather than particular sectors, and I think certain sectors are more likely to have those traits, would be my answer.
Else? Bob?
Yeah, same thing. I think it's industry agnostic, right? I mean, everyone has to pay people. Everyone has to pay people either weekly, fortnightly, monthly. Payroll processes are consistent. I don't think any industry necessarily. I think it's all about internal strategic direction, as Doug was talking about and Wendy was saying. You know, what does an organisation want to do? Where does it want to focus its energy? It then drives out whether they want to outsource.
Right. Okay. Let's move on then. So that's kind of, we've kind of looked there really at a huge amount already. So I think really, I think I've covered everything that we need to do. So I guess in terms of outsourcing, is it when is the right decision for payroll to remain in-house was one thing I'd quite like to touch on, because Mandy, from your point of view, have you got some ideas on why that might be? We've got to look at both ways, haven't we? So is it right for a business to keep it in-house, or is it right for a business to put it out? So what are your thoughts on that?
And they're just a selection of sort of SD Worx customers, and you can see sort of in terms of sector, etc., that it's not always sort of one sector goes one way. The one thing sort of I would say, sort of not like a dog, outsourcing isn't necessarily for life. You know, it doesn't have to be a decision that has to be made today and you can never go back. I think it depends on where the business is, and we have and again we talked about flexibility being key when selecting a provider. We've got customers who have started outsourced and potentially sort of gone back in-house and vice versa. And Wendy, especially, sort of, I know we've talked around those things, and the decision for Bestway wasn't as cut and dry in the beginning. So sort of I do think that there are some really key areas where people do tend to keep it in-house, where either culturally outsourcing isn't something that the business buys into. Some organisations actually have the technology capability and the budget to build that facility in-house. And I think sort of globally also there's sometimes a move to provide that shared service environment for other parts of the group, which then technically is the overall group providing an in-house payroll, which then provides outsourced payroll to other bits of the group. So I think there are specific areas, but the other thing I would say is I still think it comes back to flexibility, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you outsource today, you're outsourced forever.
All right, well, we've run out of time rapidly, so let's move on to our next poll. So everyone, let's see if we can have a go at this one. So in the next 10 months, what are your plans to overcome? Your HR payroll WFM challenges? So is it A, consider outsourcing our payroll? B, we'll review our HR and payroll solution. C, review our workforce management solution. D, consider a talent management solution. Or E, none of the above. So if everyone could have a little go at that one, we'd be pleased to see what you think there and how that poll shows. And that's in the next 10 months.
Yeah, we're going to keep it running a little while longer. I can see we have 39% of the audience voted, so just a little while longer to collect everyone's responses.
So I think there's some pretty key ones here, isn't there? Really. Any thoughts from the panel? What's going to show top here?
I would say 1 or 2.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same place as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to. Oh, people are still trickling in their votes. All right, I'm going to now close that poll, and I'm going to share on screen. So there we go, 13% will consider outsourcing payroll, and you're right, 75% will review HR and payroll solutions, 13% reviewing the WFM solution, and no votes for the final two options. I'll hide that off the screen now.
Okay, so we won't dwell on that because we've got very little time. But okay, so let's move on to our case study area with our senior HR leaders here today. So very quickly, AG Barr, Doug, obviously thanks for joining us. Quick one, launched in 1901, UK and international organisation, employing about around 1,000 people across UK times 10 locations. So, and famous for its famous brand Iron Brew. So now let's run a bit of a quiz here, quick fun one. This is your chance to win an M&S Christmas hamper, which would be lovely. So have a guess at this one. So how many units of Iron Brew are sold every second?
So if everybody could send in their answers via the question box, I'm going to keep an eye on the answers coming in. So if everybody would like to send in their guesses.
And I think the first correct answer that comes through, Natalie, will win the hamper. That's right, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And how many units of Iron Brew are sold every second?
We need some more.
Let us know when we get the correct answer, Natalie.
Not yet, no. Some more.
Can I have a go?
We can keep that running anyway. I'll keep an eye on it in the background.
Right, keep an eye on it. We'll come back and let's.
I presume you can vote more than once if you're sort of out there.
A few times.
I suppose you could, Mandy.
Right, let's see what happens there. Let's carry on then. So, and then also Wendy's joined us today. So Wendy's from the Bestway group. So Bestway, I think the group employs over 33,000 colleagues across the world. Largest UK franchise off-license and convenience chain, and brands you'll know such as Bargain, Booze Select, and I think around 2,000 people employed in the UK across 700 stores. Hang on, no, yeah, that's correct, isn't it? Okay, so just some questions, I guess, for actually, should we do this one as well? No, let's let the answers come on the other one, Natalie, first, and I'll do this one after. So just on questions for you two, Doug and Wendy, if I may. Wendy, I know you've just started on your journey with outsourcing your payroll, as we've found out today. I guess what was it initiated you, I guess, to kind of consider outsourcing, in the first place?
We'd acquired a business actually that already had some outsourced payroll provision. So we're working with a partner actually on an outsourced finance arrangement. So payroll came as part of that. When we came to insource the finance, our technology for our own payroll wasn't necessarily sufficient enough to insource the payroll element with the rest of the finance insource. So we started to seek some help and think about, well, how did we upgrade our technology to make sure that, that if we did do the insource, and that's where it started actually, the discussions, that what we had was fit for purpose, and then went through a procurement exercise to look for the technology that we needed. SD Worx were actually already partnering another part of the group. So they already provide the solution within Well Pharmacy for about 7,000 employees and operated a managed payroll for them. And so it sort of all started to come together as to whether that was probably going to be the most viable solution for us. We did, as Mandy said, actually really debate hard whether we outsourced the outsource we had to outsource, but then built everything in, or we kind of flipped everything. We went backwards and forwards really right till quite recently, didn't we, Mandy? And I think for us, what was great was the flexibility of being able to access the technology, the service and support and the solution that we needed, and do that in the right way, but have some fluidity. So SD Worx have been great, enough to say, well, if you're outsourcing now, you can switch that to an in-source arrangement at some point, if that's what you want to do, and retain the technology that you've got. So actually, from our perspective, it wasn't a decision to outsource. We're an organisation that generally doesn't outsource. It was more around accessing the technology, and for us particularly in the provider we went with, because they had access to a really great T&A integrated solution, which for hourly paid workers really helps, particularly in, you know, multi-site locations. So if anything, it was probably that, it was the whole package, not really the payroll, that kind of got the business case to where it got to. The provider could deliver everything that we needed as one integrated package.
And Wendy, so were all departments and stakeholders kind of involved in agreeing the business case?
Mandy will tell you, we probably really put you through your paces for quite some time. We had store managers involved, you know, we had operators involved. There were a lot of people involved in that process to be able to demonstrate, you know, that the different providers could give us what we needed, that the technology would work, and that from a control, a labour management, that it would deliver, you know, the solution that was required. So yeah, definitely, and still very much so. You know, the business are very involved in signing off every element of what we're doing.
And no, any kind of challenges in preparing that business case for you, you know, or was it all fairly straightforward?
No, more around the dilemma. I mean, we took some time, didn't we, Mandy? You know, kind of going round and thinking it through, working with lots of different people. So the business case, we had an end in sight, you know, of what Utopia would look like. And actually it was then just trying to understand who could provide us the technology to deliver what we needed. That was the first port. And then the debate around the managed payroll or not, the SaaS or the managed payroll, was probably the last part, and not really part of that business case. That was more an internal decision as to kind of what would work best. So the driver was being able to manage labour effectively, manage cost and manage risk, really. And actually from a business case perspective, for any business owner or business leadership team, you know, they're super critical right now, and that, you know, that was before we entered into a pandemic and got very close to Brexit and all of the other things that we're currently facing when those debates started.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Doug, if I could come to you briefly. So, when did you actually outsource, Doug? What year was that?
Back in early 2018, January 2018. So it'll be 3 years now in a month's time.
And again, your kind of key reasons, or what for doing so?
Not dissimilar to what Wendy said. Number of things were happening in our business at that point in time. We wanted to reorganize a number of departments, and HR wasn't excluded from that. We took a strategic review about what do we want to do, particularly in our central functions, so IT, HR, finance, and part of this allowed me to put forward an argument or a case for actually this is part, for the reasons similar to what he said. I've got key people risks here. I've got high turnover of staff and a very, very small team. I've got technology that's incredibly dated. I've got legislative changes that are coming up just now. And critically, there's a possibility if I align these things, I could potentially reduce my costs slightly, modestly I may add. The last thing for us is that at this point in time, we didn't have an HR database. So a bit like Wendy, SD Worx had the complete solution for us. It had our HR database and our payroll solution. So we combined the two things. And then the last thing, just because we weren't doing enough at that point in time, we thought we would introduce a flexible benefits platform, and we couldn't do that with an in-house payroll with the tech solution we had. So all the sort of stars, as I said, came to an alignment and says, actually, this feels like the right thing to do. And similar to Wendy, we did a similar sort of collaborative exercise where there were multiple stakeholders involved in the decision. You just can't take decisions around payroll without involving people. It's too close to home, as I would say, and you get a better solution if you do that.
And again, for you then, after some period of time since 2018, was the business case a thumbs up?
Mostly, if I'm being honest, because I think we should be honest in these things. We underestimated how much if I can explain 1,000 people, but 500 of them have quite complex payrolls, lots of shift pays, overtime, etc., varying every month, and various allowances. So half of it's like Wendy, probably got a higher percentage, and therefore the pulling together of all that data set to be handed over to be calculated, we underestimated the resources we needed in-house. And that's primarily because we still didn't quite fully automate some of those processes, which we're now 3 years later getting to, and that should improve that. So don't underestimate what you still have to do, and then even when you outsource it is the message.
Almost creates more work.
Yeah, there is and the last thing I would say that I underestimated was that in my mind I'd outsourced payroll, but in my employee's mind I still did payroll, and therefore you must never forget that.
No, the book still stops with you, doesn't it?
And Mandy, just thoughts on what Doug's just said as well.
I'm going to be entirely honest that my internet wavered at the point Doug was speaking, so sort of I'm not entirely sure about the final bit that he said, but sort of one of the things I definitely picked up on was I've never heard the phrase that the stars aligned on payroll before, and I'm definitely going to take that one and use it in 20 years. That's one of the things I'm going to take away. But I mean, I definitely think from an outsourcing business case point of view, you said it doesn't always stack up the way you want it to. I think the other thing with the business case and selecting a partner is we have to keep looking at that as the contract moves on and as times change, and ensure that we're constantly updating that business case and revisiting it to check that there's anything else that, you know, sort of we can do to maximize the challenges that are upcoming in the business.
Yeah. It's like any relationship, you have to work at it, you know, both sides, to make it really effective.
Yeah.
Well, just a quick overview from you. Sorry, Doug.
Yeah, no, thanks, Peter, and I concur with what Wendy, Doug, and Mandy said. I mean, you know, we help organisations with that transition, and Doug, I'm really pleased you said it right. It's not just about throwing payroll over the fence to say get on with it. There is a whole end-to-end that has to be looked at, right? Everything that is your responsibility as the person and the client that owns the relationship with the employees. So, you know, end-to-end processes all looked at. How does the data flow? How does it integrate with the wider technology stack? That all has to be taken into consideration. Absolutely the right thing to do for most organizations, but don't underestimate the amount of work that has to go in the background.
Yeah, and take the time and put the resource in to do that piece of work up front. It really does pay dividend downstream.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we are pretty much covered most things we wanted to cram in today. Natalie, did we get any responses on prize draw?
We did. We've only run one. Nobody's got it right. So Doug, it was a good quiz.
Good question.
Using
we should do the other one. Let's do the Bestway one and see if someone can win that one.
Yeah, I think for this one we'll give it to. Okay, yeah. Let's run the next one then quickly, Peter. If that's okay. Do you want to go back to that slide? There we go.
This last pop quiz.
Yeah.
So this one here is another one you can have a go at. So how many pints of beer and cider were sold in bargain booze this year? Bear in mind the year that we're in. A, 30 to 34 million, 35 to 39 million, 40 to 45 million, or D, over 46 million. So have a go at that one now to win this M&S hamper.
First one to send in the correct answer wins.
Come on.
Got it. Quick. I think, oh, here we go. Lisa Blair, well done. It's D, over 46 million. There we go.
Well done, Lisa.
I'll be in touch with you, Lisa.
Okay, we are pretty much out of time, everyone, but thanks everyone for joining us this morning. It was a packed discussion of content which hopefully has helped you. Thanks for your attention and time. Thanks for Bob, Wendy, Doug and Mandy for your insight and knowledge. No substitute for some real case studies there as well, I think, which is good. And thank you for SD Worx for partnering with us. It's an important topic at the moment. It's very topical. Look out for the recording, further resources, soon, and we'll send that to you. And well done for those winners. Thanks again, and look forward to joining you on another session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
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 Cheers.